Be so much more joyous than last week's, but it's all part of the period of the Judges. And it's a reminder that our world too is made up of places and events that are terribly depressing because human beings are sinners. And yet God, in the time of the Judges, as he has in all times, is quietly raising up men and women who are exemplary and inspiring and often surprising. You have the sheet that I gave you has two charts on. One is a little walk through the book, 4 chapters. It's one of the most skillfully written books in the Bible. Often it is the primer used by Hebrew students to polish up their Hebrew when they're beginning their studies. And there's a good reason for that. It has family. And when you have family, you have men and you have women. And so the Hebrew language here has feminine forms as well as masculine forms. I'm talking about language. And you can do, and we're going to bring up a few things this morning that may be interesting to you. The story is the story of a foreigner from the point of view of the Judges. She comes from the country of Moab, and a set of circumstances connected with family led her to Bethlehem, and she became the great-great-great-great-grandmother of King David. But that's not the story. Let's get into it. This is the story of Ruth. Well, we'll pick this up as we go through it. But you notice there that there is tremendous structure underlying this story. The holy writer, whoever it was, wanted to tell a great story. Whoop, too fast. This is how the book starts. So we know that we're in the period of the Judges, when the Judges ruled. There was a famine. Now, exactly when this famine happened, scholars have tried to determine without success. Was it early in those 300 years of the Judges, or did it come in the middle of that time, or late? We frankly don't know. I will tell you that some of the language of this book is archaic, and there's at least one custom, archaic means kind of old, that leads us to maybe conclude that it came early in the period of the Judges. Okay. A man from Bethlehem, it's a story of a family, together with his wife, and he had 2 sons, went to live for a while. Notice they weren't intending this to be permanent, in the land of Moab. Now there's a map. You can orient yourself around the Dead Sea. Judah is west of the Dead Sea. Moab, as you can see, is east. And famines. Israel, like all countries in the northern hemisphere, work with the prevailing westerlies. The winds and the clouds and the rain go from west to east. And you have to know that if Judah, Jerusalem, Bethlehem is at this level, Moab is up higher. So when the clouds could not drop their rain in Bethlehem and therefore kept the crops from growing, those same clouds, when they got to a higher elevation, dropped rain, and so in the country of Moab, there was food to eat. That's behind what happened. Whoa. The man's name was Elimelech. We had Abimelech, which means my father is king. Elimelech simply says, My God is king. That immediately tells you here's a family and a man that belongs in God's intended understanding about this life. Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. Naomi means, well, it's kind of hard to put into words. But do we have a Naomi here? Oh, there she is. You tell me. I got a brain freeze right now. Naomi means pleasant. She says, yeah, that's me. And then they had two boys, Machlon and Kilian. So those names are interesting. Were they nicknames? Because one of them means kind of sickly, and the other one kind of means weakling. Well, they didn't survive. So their names were either prescient, anticipating the future, or strange names. Now, Elimelech died. And this happened within the 10 years of their departing. And so now she was left with her two sons. In those days, there was no welfare system. Family had to take care of family. So everything depended upon these two sons. They married Moabite women. It's pretty hard to get the kids to wait for 10 years to go back to Bethlehem and find somebody from the Israelite clans. Well, they found some Moabite guys, and they got married. I mean, Moabite, not guys. Orpah. Which very famous person took that name and respelled it? Oprah, exactly. And that happens. There was a quiz in something that I did within the last 6 months that said, which very famous American personality is named after a woman in the Bible? The quiz was wrong because it's not Oprah, but it's Orpah. And the other name was Ruth. Ruth is a hard name to have an etymology for, but that's okay. I don't know Moabite. Do you? No. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to aid his people, this is 10 years have passed, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to be home. Oh, did I miss something? No? What's that? Oh, yeah, the boys died. So now you have no Social Security system at all in place. You've got 3 widow women, and this happened to be in a foreign country. And so we do see here that she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return around the Dead Sea back to Bethlehem. Naomi is typical of some of the people in my family that I know who were seniors, and they lived pretty much according to custom. And Naomi thought it was the best thing for her girls to remain in Moab. Now, Moab had false gods, but we can't assume that everybody in Moab was completely ignorant about the true God. And these two women probably had learned from their family association who the God of Israel was. So to have them stay in Moab wasn't necessarily a bad thing. That's often how the gospel is spread from place to place. And Naomi says, well, I hope you find a man. You're widows, and that's the best thing that can happen to you. Then you'll be taken care of. Now, here's something that you have to understand. According to the law of the Levirate marriage, Moses provided that if a woman died, or her husband died, and they had no children, and there was an unmarried brother, that brother was to marry the widow so that the family line would not be disturbed or broken. May seem strange to us, but as I've lived in different countries, I found that marriage customs are extremely varied and different from place to place. There's no such thing as one way to do it. And so Ruth says, you know, I don't have any other boys. I'm not married. But even if I had a new husband and got pregnant and had twins, how many years would it take before you could have one of these sons according to the law of Moses to marry? So that's not very practical, girls. Better for you to go home and find somebody in your own country. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. It shows you that she had wonderful affection for her mother-in-law. It wasn't just Ruth, but she left. And Naomi says, smart girl, Ruth, why don't you do the same thing? Now, this particular response of Ruth has come into Christian churches and often is a wedding text, although it has nothing to do with marriage. But the idea of, no, don't ask me to leave you. Where you are, I will be. Where you go, I will go. And finally, your people will be my people and your God, my God. Well worth quoting, well worth passing on to the younger generation. Now, to be buried is not as important today, although most of you probably, if you've already picked out a burial plot, it has something in connection with your family. But in ancient times, it was very much more tied to family. And what Ruth was saying here, there's something about you, mother-in-law, that I want to be a part of. Your God is my God. And so I hope there's a place in the burial plot back in Bethlehem for me, because that's where I want to be buried. Naomi, a wise woman that she was, stopped urging her, and the two of them went on the journey until they came back to Bethlehem. And when they got to Bethlehem, it's interesting, again, something that's not so common here, but I found it common in India and also in Ukraine, actually, that when you go into a town, you have a welcoming committee, and if you happen to be women, the women will come out to meet you. And this is what happened in Bethlehem. And they remembered Naomi. It's been 10 years. Can this be Naomi? No, she says, don't call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant. My life hasn't been pleasant. Call me Mara. Mara means bitterness. So much like as a pastor, I've known many families very solid in the faith, and I believe Naomi was a solid believer. But she was reflecting upon what had happened in her life, and her life did not reflect her name because she had lost a husband and 2 sons. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me, brought affliction upon me. You ever feel that way? I mean, you can read Ruth and you can find a lot of sympathy, and it's not that Naomi had lost her faith or anything. She's just feeling the loss. She went away full, 2 sons, a husband. Yeah, they were hungry. They had to have food. But that was only supposed to be for a short time. But now she came back and she was empty. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite. 2 single women, widows, in a society that had no social security. And quite frankly, if there wouldn't be the love of God motivating the people, these two women had a very dismal future ahead of them. This is a story about taking care of people who don't have any safety net. Chapter 2, this is the encounter. Now you got to get your violins and start playing, because this story moves along. This is the romantic first meeting of a future husband and a future wife. He was a man of standing. His name was Boaz. Boaz in Hebrew means stalwart, 2 feet on the ground, strong. And that's what he was. And he was a propertied man, so he had fields, and everybody's wealth in those days were in fields and flocks. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go and glean. Now that was one provision in the ancient law of Moses that was to offer hope for the widows and the orphans and the strangers. And that is, God said very pointedly to the Israelites, when you harvest, don't pick up everything. When you go around the corner on the field, kind of leave that corner unharvested. When you have olive tree, don't pick up every olive. When you have grapes, when you harvest them, leave a few for the widows and the orphans and the strangers. And Ruth knew enough about her God to know that God had provided for this. So she says, let me go out there and get us some food. Couldn't go down to the supermarket. Now, as it turned out, that's sort of the Hebrew. You never would believe this. But of all the people in Bethlehem, Ruth just happened to come upon the field of Boaz. Well, no. When we look at the whole story, we know God's hand was in this all the way. He was going to give Naomi a chance to see that God had not really abandoned her at all, but that he was going to take care of her and her daughter-in-law. It just happened that Boaz was the owner of the field that Ruth chose. Now, the exchange between Boaz, when he went out to check on his workers, and the workers, so different than the book of Judges. The Lord be with you. Hey, this man, the name of God is on his lips. And he speaks to his workers that way. And they respond in kind. Now, Boaz asked, who's that gal? And now here's something that you're not going to get from reading the English text. That's on the top here. She came into the field and has remained here from the morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. That's the way your NIV reads. I wish you could all read Hebrew, because that sentence in the Hebrew language makes no sense. It's choppy. There's no grammar in it at all. And what had happened is that Boaz asked, you remember, who is this gal? And it starts out, she said, let me glean. But then she came and she stood from then in the morning until now. This one, she sat the house a little. You know what I call that? Stammering. This guy was the head of his workers. And Boaz, you got to read between the lines. He was watching this scene. And when he asked who this gal was, he could see that there was something amiss. And the guy in charge stammered to get out, and that something had gone on with this gal. Now, the key is Boaz's response. He said, my daughter, listen, don't go and glean in another field. He was basically saying, you better stay close to me and my personnel. Stay here with the women who work for me. Notice he doesn't say stay with the the male harvesters. Hey, this is just kind of a normal situation. This is a foreign girl. She's attractive. She's not an old hag. And the boys are watching. Oh, hey, sweetums, what are you doing after harvest time today? And who knows what else they may have said or done. Well, we get an inkling here. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. That's very nice English. But the Hebrew says not to touch you. What do we call that today? Sexual harassment? What'd you say? Yeah, all right. There could have been a scandal here. He says, I've given instructions. The story is very compact. But a key understanding here is that Boaz said, you can stay close to me and my workers, and you stay with my maids. I told the men not to touch you. Keep your hands off this girl. He doesn't even know her yet. But he could tell that she needed his protection. And when you're thirsty and you go and get a drink from the water jars, the men, you get permission to do something that strangers don't automatically have. We can see something's going on here. Play the violins. Now, look at what Ruth does. She is so overwhelmed by kindness beyond. I mean, if she was a little bit here, there, over a house back, you could tell that she didn't quite know where she fit in. And now this man told her, you stay here. And you trust my gals, and I've told the men to behave. And you can take a break and have water at the water jars. She just face down on the ground. Why have I found such favor in your eyes to notice me, a foreigner? You think the problems we have today in society with people that are different than us didn't exist in ancient times? Sure they did. And she was deeply, deeply moved by the kindness of this man. Boaz says, I've been told about what you have done on behalf. Hey, small town. And who grew up in a small town? Does everybody know what's going on?
Oh, yeah. Everything.
We'll quote this fine lady up in front. Oh, yeah, everything. Yeah, Boaz had already heard that this strange gal with Naomi, who had lived in Bethlehem, was a very kind person. They were widows. How you left your homeland, and now you have chosen our village. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your, and actually the word in Hebrew is slaves. Again, slavery was not the kind that we worry about today, but it means a very, very low station. Ruth speaks very from her heart. Now, at mealtime, Boaz says, come on over here. He offered her some roasted corn. Now, you don't know this, but this is like popcorn at the theater. You don't expect this from the boss. Roasted corn, it was like popcorn. And this was, again, wow, this guy, he's not only nice and moral, and he's, I think that Boaz was feeling a little bit of romantic attachment towards this beautiful young lady. She ate all she wanted and had some left over, but she didn't forget she took it home to her mother-in-law. All right, now Boaz he's going to give orders before he leaves. Let her gather among the sheaves. And again, it sort of tells us that their language towards her had not been kind. Don't reprimand her. Stupid Moabite, you don't know the laws of Moses. You don't know that you can glean. or that's what they probably told her before the boss came around. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. And Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten the popcorn. Now again, these little touches here are so beautiful. You're on your first date and you go to the movie, and this big popcorn thing your boyfriend brings to you from the today, and you eat as much as you want, and maybe Ruth had a little empty tummy, but she didn't eat it all. She put some of it away under her garment and brought it home to her mother-in-law. This is Ruth. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you go?" If you lived in a small town, did you have a matchmaker? No? No. Well, if you lived in a shtetl in Eastern Europe among the Yiddish people, there's always a metapellet. A metapellet is the matchmaker. Anybody see the movie Fiddler on the Roof? Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. That song, it comes out of this context. The one in the community, and Naomi knows that she's already said that it was good for her daughters to go and find a husband. Well, now she's moving into gear. She says, Ruth told her mother-in-law about one at whose place she had been working, and his name is Boaz. Well, that immediately makes Naomi, oh man, the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. The man that is one of our close relatives, he is one of our guardian redeemers. Now that's a long English word. In Hebrew, it's only one short word. And it is something, a goel is something like what our Lord Jesus is for you and for me. When we're destitute and we have nothing, we turn to our goel. He's our brother, but he's going to redeem us. He's going to give us a safe haven for ourselves and our lives. And this word is used, I think, 24 times in this little book, although you don't see it in English. So Boaz has an obligation. We're going to hear more about that. According to the law of Moses, you didn't just cast aside the widows and the orphans and the strangers. It's one of the hallmarks of the teaching of Moses. And by the way, I got to tell you this story. Archaeology. About a couple of years ago, found a little piece of written pottery in a place called Sha'arayim, not far from Jerusalem. It has turned out to be an outpost of King David. And we know that it was Jewish because as the archaeologists sifted through all the bones, they didn't find any pig bones. That's an important thing, because the Israelites were not allowed to eat swine, and their neighbors, the Philistines, they loved pork. So you could tell this was an Israelite community. And this little potsherd it's one of the oldest inscriptions that we have in the Hebrew language. And the subject matter of this thing that they found echoes this idea of taking care of the widows and orphans and the less privileged. Now you get that kind of thinking from a true Israelite, from a guy like King David, whose great-great-great-great-grandmother was Ruth, who heard it from Boaz. You see what I'm saying? And that's exciting to me. It's not exciting to all archaeologists. They don't like to think about such things. Now, this is, by the way, harvest time. You've got to understand that in the land of Israel, you plant seed around late October, early November, and you pray for the early rains. The early rains there are around that time. It's like winter wheat in the Dakotas. So the grain grows over the winter and it's harvested in spring. The first harvest is the barley harvest, and the second harvest, about 6 weeks later, 7 weeks later, is the wheat harvest. And the whole story here happens during that particular time of year. And so Ruth stayed, you might say, through the whole harvest season. And notice that again, she stays close to the women of Boaz. Now, this is chapter 3. Can't call it the first date, because that first date, I think, was Boaz offering popcorn. You gotta see these things. But I remember my professor who was teaching this thing to us, he said, now boys, and we were all, dare I say, lusty young men. And we actually went to a school where there weren't any girls. That made it even worse. And our professor said, now boys, there's an important lesson here in the book of Ruth. Didn't we hear some terrible stories about how women were abused and even raped to death last week? All right. Even in our society, they say boys will be boys. And was Ruth harassed? Yes, I believe she was. But now we have a story about, you might say, their second date. And from a worldly point of view, you had to say hanky-panky was going on at the threshing floor. But our professor says, boys, listen exactly to the story. This is not the story. You're going to find out later on that Boaz was so careful for Ruth's reputation that he said, now don't start talking about us meeting here at the threshing floor, because the people in town are going to draw the wrong conclusions. But this is chapter 3, and this is the second date. Ruth, Naomi by now, she's in full gear as a matchmaker. You've been working in this guy's field. Things are going pretty good. But you know, just having some gleaning at springtime, that ain't going to help us during the long, cold winter. I mean, you know, I got to find a home for you. The harvest of the barley had come in, and we find out that Boaz was appointed or elected, or he chose himself to be the person who would stay overnight and guard the threshing floor from having the grain stolen. This is the time of the judges. Remember, not everybody was moral and nice. So the matchmaker says, wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes. I told you, this is second date. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let yourself be known until he has finished eating and drinking. All right? When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. And this is interesting. This is Naomi talking. The Hebrew actually says, I will lie down. Something's going on here too. And I believe that the Hebrew text is exactly correct. Ruth is not the one who's going to do this easily. But Naomi says, if it were me, and actually I'm going to be with you, I want you to lay down at his feet. Oh, aren't you putting yourself in the jaws of the lion? Boaz is a man after all. And he's worked hard all day, and he's eaten and drank, and now he's lying down, and you're going to uncover his feet and lie down next to him? But Naomi says, I will. The difference in Hebrew is ta and ti. Ta is you, woman. Ti is I. It's going to come up again in the story. He will tell you what to do. Naomi had absolute confidence in the character of Boaz, and it was not misplaced. He was a near relative. He was a Goel. He was a kinsman redeemer. And Naomi had to fortify Ruth to believe this. He ain't going to do wrong by you, sister. He's Boaz. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor, did everything her mother said, and Ruth approached quietly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Now, there is an idiom in the Hebrew language to uncover the feet, is really to disrobe the bottom half of the body. And anybody reading the story is going to say, is that what you're saying? You're going to, he's got this long gown and you're going to pull up his gown and uncover his nakedness? Doesn't say that. But this brings the tension into the story. Is this going to be a one-night stand, or is it going to be better? And of course, we already know the story. It's going to be much, much better. This is a man of upstanding character, and later on, Boaz is going to say, and Ruth, you are a woman of outstanding character. So this is not going to be a one-night stand. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. Who are you? Hey, if I was a Boaz, I think I would say that too. I am your servant Ruth. That's the same thing that she said out in the field. Spread the corner of your garment over me. Now you don't know what that is. I know what that is. That was a proposal. Ruth proposed marriage to Boaz at this very moment. You are a kinsman redeemer. You spread your garment over me. You be my Goel. Interesting. Whoop. Now, it's interesting, the response. Boaz says, this tells us a little bit about maybe they weren't the same age. This kindness is greater than what you shared earlier at the popcorn time. You have not run after the younger men, Ruth, and whether rich or poor, I will do for you everything that you ask. Reading between the lines, Boaz has all the way through the commentaries from ancient times been looked upon as an older man. Had he never found a gal? Obviously not. Was there anything wrong with him? No. Maybe it was the time of the judges. There weren't a lot of good gals around. But he knew he had a jewel here in the person of Ruth. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. That says an awful lot. You're not a gal that chases after the young men. Now, I know that the young men were whistling and touching, and I put an end to that kind of stuff. But I also know that it wasn't because you were leading them on, that you're a hussy or so different than the rest of the book of Judges. You are a woman of noble character. Now, he had to say, I'm a kinsman redeemer, a Goel, but there's another one who actually has rank over me, closer relative, who can actually do what the Bible wants to be done for widow women like you. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as a Goel, fine. But if he is not, as surely as the Lord lives, I'll step in there and do it. Now, there's two things going on here. Who had proposed? Ruth. Had Boaz accepted? Yes. Now, here's Theology 101 at Mequon Seminary about marriage. I'm going to use some Latin. Consensus facet matrimonium. All right, you know what it means? What? Oh, you don't? Sorry, I saw nodding. Marriage is made by mutual consent by two people who have nothing hindering. And in the eyes of God, if you make that consent, man to woman, woman to man, and it's mutual, and there's nothing hindering, you are married in the eyes of God, never mind a church ceremony or something else. They didn't have church ceremonies in these days. In fact, the closest marriage we have to this one in the book of Genesis is when Rebekah was brought back by Abraham's servant, and it's another one of those play the violins. Isaac's walking back and forth in the field. He's probably saying, "Oh my goodness, I've never had a date before, and now the servant's going to bring home a wife for me. I'm really, yeah." That's the way the story goes. And no words exchanged. Isaac takes Rebekah's hand and leads her to the tent of his mother. Now, in ancient times and those customs, they had made a consent to each other to be husband and wife, and that was it. The marriage happened. So here we could say, in the eyes of God, at the threshing floor, Boaz and Ruth were married in the eyes of God, but they had this problem, this economic problem. These two were widows, were destitute. And there was a piece of property. Obviously, Elimelech, the dead father of the family, had mortgaged the property, and the family had lost it. Now, the Goel redeemer could buy it back so that these women would have property on which they could grow food. But this is all part of the background of the story. There's two things going on here: a marriage in the eyes of God, and this problem with the Goel also being someone who would make sure that the property would return to its family. So she lay at his feet until morning. No hanky-panky, no fooling around here. My professor was right. He says, boys, take note of this. When you are tempted to be like the boys in the village. You certainly can.
When in the previous slide, when you said, when Boaz said there was someone else, was there another relative closer than he, that he had to, that was the exception, that he was going to try to take out of the way or give them a chance to?
Okay, the question is, was there another Goel that was closer in rank, I called it that, than he? Answer is yes. And Boaz knew his Mosaic law, and he knew that he could not claim this as his right unless the other man with a higher claim, we aren't given all the legal background, would assert it. Yeah, he'd have to bow out. Yeah, as far as the property is concerned. But they're married. Keep that in mind. Now, here's a little note at the end of this chapter. Boaz was there, it was harvest, and he asked her to open up her, and he filled it full of grain, so that night when she went home, Naomi had set her up for this whole thing, and this was going to be sort of a down payment on the future. Boaz would take care of these gals. I just love reading this in Hebrew. What does a matchmaker do when the girl comes home? Tell me all about it. And, Ruth showed the measures of grain. Yeah, it had gone quite well. Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. This man will not rest until the matter is settled. Naomi was right. She could read character. And she said, remember, this is Ruth. She's from a foreign country. She hasn't lived here that long. Can you trust a guy like Boaz? And Naomi says, you bet you can. He's not going to let the day go by until he's settled the matter. Now, chapter 4. Town gate. That's City Hall in ancient time. And that's where you conduct business. And the other guy, the one with the higher rank, happened to stroll by. Hebrew has a nice word for this man. Almoni Pulmoni. It's like Mr. So-and-so. Doesn't give his real name, but all right. Come over here, my friend, Mr. So-and-so, and sit down. So Boaz is setting things up to clear the air. And Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town, and they said, sit here, and they did so. Now, today among the Jewish community, you can have legal proceedings if you have 10 adult males present. And I found that out when I was on an airplane going to Israel one year. I had a beard longer than it is now, and they just assumed that I was one of them. And I was invited to join the minyan to take care of some rabbinic matter. And I told them, well, no, I'm a Christian. I think I should bring this matter to your attention. Naomi came back from Moab. She would like to not only take the mortgage off, but she'd like to sell that piece of land that belonged to Elimelech. Now, the women don't have any money, but the kinsman redeemer can redeem it. If you want to, do it. But if you don't, I will. So now, here's the answer. The Almoni Pilmoni says, yeah, I'm also into getting extra property. No problem. I got the money. I can do it. Now, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also, now, that's what your NIV says, you will also. But the Hebrew says, I also have acquired Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. Again, this ta and ti ending, both of them are in the written scriptures, but one of them is to be read in church and one is not to be read. Anyway, I thoroughly believe that he says he's now letting the cat out of the bag. They don't know. Now, Mr. Almoni Pilmoni, if you buy this thing, you got to know that I have pledged myself to Ruth as husband. Now, the way it worked in those days, if the Goel paid the money to redeem the land, remember that after 7 years, all debts were canceled and stuff like that. Hey, a year passes, guess what? I just married a woman. She's young, she's beautiful, she can have, well, we don't know if she can have kids. But if she does have a kid, guess what? You lose your money. You pay the money to get, to become the property owner for Naomi, but you lose that money if there is an heir that's born. So what's the reaction of the other man? He says, I cannot redeem it then. I might endanger my own estate. Yeah, that's understandable. I'm not going to put a large amount of money aside for something that could be, poof, gone in 9 months. So he gives up his right to redeem. Now, in order to seal the deal, this is one of those customs that's rather strange. Take off your sandal and hand it to the other person. Well, we have strange customs too. We scratch our name out, and by the way, people don't know how to write their names anymore. It's amazing to me that that even counts anymore. But in those days, by the way, the thing that really counted was your word. And there were 10 witnesses here that had heard what went on between Boaz and Almoni Pilmoni. So they took off the sandal, which basically was signing the deal. And then Boaz announced, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech and his 2 dead sons. I have also acquired, notice part 2, Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead. That means the property is going to go through any child that I might have, and that his name will not disappear from among his family in his hometown. You are the witnesses. This seals the deal. The romance is now the salvation of these two destitute women. We are witnesses, everybody said. Hey, and may the Lord make the woman who's coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, as they all knew the Bible stories. And may you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. So the elders of the city say this is a story that has come out okay. And we are witnesses. And through the offspring of the Lord gives you by this young woman, may the family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar. These guys knew their Bible stories. These are all from the book of Genesis. So not everybody in the time of the judges was like that Levite who, we heard about last week. Some people knew what the Word of God had said. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. Oh, I love that picture. Isn't that a nice picture? Isn't Ruth pretty? And when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive. She had been married for a few years to that Moabite guy and didn't have any children. This happens. I know my mom and dad prayed for a child for 4 years, none. And then I came. So sometimes that happens. She gave birth to a son. Now, the women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord this day. He has given you a Goel, your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons. Oh, that's saying an awful lot. Ruth, you're priceless. You're just wonderful. The women, remember, who said to her, Naomi, no, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because Almighty has laid his hand upon me and my life has turned bitter. Now the story comes to this nice conclusion where the ladies all get together around. And Naomi took the child in her arms and she ended up being like any grandma. She was especially close to this little guy. And his name was Obed, which means one who serves the Lord. And he was the father of Jesse. Ever hear him? And he was the father of David. So there you have the family tree. Those are all names that you don't know, but it goes all the way back to the Exodus. And then that tree there, it doesn't end with that. And in the New Testament Gospels, there are 4 women who are mentioned in the genealogy. One of them is Ruth. Beautiful story. So here's that sheet that I gave you. In the Judges, we had spiritual darkness. This little 4-chapter book shows that the light of the gospel had not gone out. We heard so much about immorality in the book of Judges, but that is not what you find here. You are a woman of noble character, and Boaz certainly was, protecting her from harassment and spreading his, accepting her proposal of marriage. The Judges people were following idols. Here, Ruth chooses Israel's God. We have devotion here, even to someone who was only married into the family, whereas in the Judges we had disloyalty. You have the contrast between lust and love. True love here between one man and one woman. We had war. That's how last week ended. Here you have peace. We had unspeakable cruelty. A woman raped to death last week. But here you have kindness. Enforced by Boaz at the field, but also by God's grace, brought back into the heart of Naomi, who took back her name. Now she wasn't bitter anymore. And from sorrow to blessing, instead of from blessing to sorrow. And then the words selfless and selfish. Those kind of sound the same in English, but they're totally different. And this is a story of unexpected faithfulness. What? A Moabite woman? A widow? She is that outstanding? What? Boaz? Yes, 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 yes. This is a story that tells you that even in dark times, God has his faithful few. Okay. Anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Do you think that those 10 witnesses, did they have any inkling about what was going to be discussed beforehand? He said it was a small town. Did anyone know, is Boaz going to bring this up to us, the witness, or did they have
Well,
any assumptions of what was going to happen?
if we look at the timeline, there isn't any time for that. Boaz went out there to take care of the grain he had done the harvest. Suddenly, who are you? And then she proposes. Now, the ground had been plowed. We read that in chapter 2, their first date. We know that he had a kind feeling towards her, and she certainly did towards him. But do you think the whole town knew that? Yeah. Now, I think the answer to your question is no. This wasn't known ahead of time. Do you notice that when you're reading a Hebrew story, you got to read between the lines, and you got to really read carefully the Hebrew text in its fullness. And I just enjoy doing this. Do I enjoy teaching this to students? You bet your life. Because it's like the time of the judges. Where's our pastor? Oh, he's an old one. The young one has gotten ready he's going to be preaching. But that was old Irvin Kwolke who talked to us about Ruth. And boys, be careful. Be like Boaz and find a woman like Ruth. Yes?
In your own opinion, do you have any idea who wrote this book and when it took place in the time of the judges?
Okay, the last one first. Do I know when it was written during the time of the judges? Actually not. We do know that for a time Moab ruled. Remember the judges? You had Lefty Ehud, who was that fat king of the Moabites. That was way at the beginning. Obviously, Moab was doing well then. It was at the time when they had the famine. Some people have suggested that would be early. But the genealogy here isn't very long. Ruth is sort of placed as the great-great-great-grandmother of King David, and that doesn't... But then again, we know that in the genealogies often only important people were mentioned, and some links are just not mentioned. So no, we don't know. The other half of the question was... Oh, who wrote the book? Jewish tradition says Samuel. There are indications because it mentions David that it was probably written down at least at the time of David. And who was the prophet of God who anointed David? It was Samuel. But we don't know. And I think I told you that it's during the time of the judges. There are things that are outside of the words of God which have to do with organizing things and putting things in order. And one of the questions, when you didn't have a book like we do with a spine and you can flip from Genesis all the way to Revelation, that particular technology wasn't invented till several hundred years after Jesus. Everything was on scrolls. Well, what order do you make the scrolls? And Ruth is a real short one. And Judges is, comparatively speaking, a short book. And so many scholars have said that originally Ruth was placed after those 5 horrible chapters we looked at last week as a counterbalance. But at the time of Jesus, they had begun taking parts of the Bible and reading them at festivals. And so at the time of the harvest of barley, that's when all of this happened, harvest of wheat, it became customary to read the story of Ruth. Just like when they celebrated that the temple had been destroyed, but that it would be restored, the 5-chapter book of Lamentations, it was once part of Jeremiah, but then it was taken out and made separate, so that you have either 24 books in the Old Testament or 22. We shouldn't be troubled by that. This is all about organizing stuff. One more. When did the kinsman redeemer start? It's in the laws of Moses. Yeah. It goes back to the instructions of Moses. Now, do we have all the legal ins and outs? No, if you read up on this, you'll find out that there's a lot that we didn't know. And sometimes God would lay down a principle and he'd let the people work out how to apply it. I can live with that too. Let's close with prayer. We praise and thank you, Lord, that you raise up in every generation people who have high character and who remain for us an example for our lives and our relationships. We should never forget those who are destitute and in need of our kindness. We have a Goel, a Redeemer in heaven who has taken care of every one of our needs. We shouldn't be miserly, therefore, about helping those around us who are in need. Thank you, Lord, for the story of Ruth and the story of Boaz, and giving us insights that in the time of the judges there were people of God who loved God and treated each other in the love of God. Amen. Yes, sir.